know how far can hen fly? Is it 100 meters, 250 meters, 500 meters? The answer is 500 meters. Hens generally have limited flying abilities, often around 500 meters at most, for short bursts or to roost in trees. Do you know how far can parrot fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 160 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Parrots can cover distances of about 100 kilometers during their flights, showcasing their impressive flying abilities. Do you know how far can sparrow fly? Is it 1 kilometer, 5 kilometers, 3 kilometers? The answer is 3 kilometers. Sparrows typically cover distances of about 3 kilometers during their flights. They are known for short, quick flights over moderate distances. Do you know how far can crow fly? Is it 60 kilometers, 40 kilometers, 20 kilometers? The answer is 40 kilometers. Crows can cover distances of about 40 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their ability to cover moderate distances while flying. Do you know how far can dove fly? Is it 500 meters, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers? The answer is 2 kilometers. Doves can cover distances of about 2 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their moderate flying abilities over short to moderate distances. Do you know how far can finch fly? Is it 500 meters, 1 kilometer, 3 kilometers? The answer is 500 meters. Finches typically cover distances of about 500 meters during their flights. They are known for the short to moderate flying capabilities. Do you know how far can pigeon fly? Is it 300 kilometers, 240 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Pigeons can cover distances of about 500 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their remarkable homing abilities and long-distance flights. Do you know how far can kingfisher fly? Is it 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers? The answer is 30 kilometers. Kingfishers can cover distances of about 30 kilometers during their flights. They are known for the quick, darting flights over relatively short distances. Do you know how far can seagull fly? Is it 700 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 300 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Seagulls can cover distances of about 500 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their ability to cover long distances during migration. Do you know how far can hawk fly? Is it 500 kilometers, 400 kilometers, 300 kilometers? The answer is 300 kilometers. Hawks can cover distances of about 300 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their ability to cover substantial distances during migration and hunting expeditions. Do you know how far can pelican fly? Is it 80 kilometers, 160 kilometers, 320 kilometers? The answer is 320 kilometers. Pelicans can cover distances of about 320 kilometers during their flights. They are known for their long-distance flights during migrations and while foraging for food. Do you know how far can rooster fly? Is it 50 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters? The answer is 100 meters. Roosters typically have limited flying capabilities, usually around 100 meters at most. Do you know how far can sandhill crane fly? Is it 1,200 kilometers, 800 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 800 kilometers. Sandhill cranes are known to cover distances of about 800 kilometers during their migrations. They can fly long distances during their seasonal movements. Do you know how far can wandering albatross fly? Is it 3,000 kilometers, 9,000 kilometers, 15,000 kilometers? The answer is 15,000 kilometers. Wandering albatrosses are known for their extensive flights, covering distances of about 10,000 kilometers during their migrations. They hold one of the longest known migration ranges among birds. Do you know how far can Arctic tern fly? Is it 100,000 kilometers, 70,000 kilometers, 30,000 kilometers? The answer is 70,000 kilometers. Arctic terns are known to cover incredible distances of about 70,000 kilometers during their annual migrations, which is among the longest migrations of any bird species. Do you know how far can Eurasian hobby fly? Is it 1,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers? The answer is 5,000 kilometers. Eurasian hobbies can cover distances of about 5,000 kilometers during their migrations, showcasing their ability to travel significant distances between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can European roller fly? Is it 1,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers? The answer is 6,000 kilometers. European rollers can cover distances of about 6,000 kilometers during their migrations, traveling between their breeding and wintering grounds. They undertake long-distance journeys as part of their migratory routes. Do you know how far can blackpoll warbler fly? Is it 6,000 kilometers, 18,000 kilometers, 12,000 kilometers? The answer is 12,000 kilometers. Blackpoll warblers can cover extensive distances of about 12,000 kilometers during their migration, making one of the longest non-stop overwater flights by any songbird during migration. They undertake an incredible journey from North America to South America. Do you know how far can yellow warbler fly? Is it 10,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. Yellow warblers can cover distances of about 3,000 kilometers during their migratory journeys. They undertake moderate distance migrations between their breeding and wintering grounds. Do you know how far can tree swallow fly? Is it 4,000 kilometers, 9,000 kilometers, 12,000 kilometers? The answer is 12,000 kilometers. Tree swallows can cover distances of about 12,000 kilometers during their migrations. They undertake long-distance flights between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can common redpoll fly? Is it 1,500 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. Common redpolls can cover distances of about 3,000 kilometers during their migration. They undertake moderate distance migrations between their breeding and wintering grounds. Do you know how far can American goldfinch fly? Is it 1,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. American goldfinches can cover distances of about 3,000 kilometers during their migration. They undertake moderate distance migrations between their breeding and wintering grounds. Do you know how far can house finch fly? Is it 200 kilometers, 800 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. House finches can cover distances of about 500 kilometers during their migration. They usually undertake shorter to moderate distance flights between their habitats. Do you know how far can Eurasian siskin, fly. Is it 500 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers? The answer is 1,500 kilometers. Eurasian siskins can cover distances of about 1,500 kilometers during their migration. They typically undertake moderate distance flights between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can American robin fly? Is it 1,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. American robins can cover distances of about 3,000 kilometers during their migration. They undertake moderate to long-distance migrations between their breeding and wintering grounds. Do you know how far can European greenfinch fly? Is it 800 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers? The answer is 1,500 kilometers. European greenfinches can cover distances of about 1,500 kilometers during their migration. They usually undertake moderate distance flights between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can common starling fly? Is it 500 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers? The answer is 1,500 kilometers. Common starlings can cover distances of about 1,500 kilometers during their migrations. They often undertake medium-distance flights between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can gray jay fly? Is it 100 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 200 kilometers? The answer is 200 kilometers. Grey jays are not known for extensive migratory flights. Their flying distance is generally limited and often confined to their local territories rather than long-distance migrations. Hence, estimating their migratory range is challenging, but they usually do not cover vast distances compared to many migratory birds. Do you know how far can American crow fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. American crows are not known for extensive migratory flights. They typically do not cover vast distances compared to many migratory bird species, often staying within their local territories year-round. Therefore, estimating their migratory range is not commonly applicable. Do you know how far can common raven fly? Is it 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Common ravens are known to cover extensive territories, with their flights often involving exploring large areas for food and resources rather than traditional migratory routes. While they can cover significant distances, estimating their migratory range might not be precise due to their non-migratory behaviors. Do you know how far can blue jay fly? Is it 200 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Blue jays are known for their moderate migratory behavior, covering distances of about 500 kilometers during their migrations. They undertake moderate distance flights between their breeding and wintering areas. Do you know how far can black-billed magpie fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 100 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Black-billed magpies are not typically migratory over long distances. They often make local movements within their territories, with flights usually covering shorter distances. Estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can western scrub jay fly? Is it 100 kilometers, 150 kilometers, 300 kilometers? The answer is 150 kilometers. Western scrub jays typically do not migrate over long distances. They often make local movements within their territories, with flights usually covering shorter distances. Estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can Stella's jay fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 300 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Stella's jays usually do not migrate over long distances. They tend to remain within their territories year-round, with their flights often covering shorter distances for foraging or territorial movements. Therefore, estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can Eurasian jay fly? Is it 30 kilometers, 70 kilometers, 50 kilometers? The answer is 50 kilometers. Eurasian jays are typically resident birds, not known for long migratory flights. They tend to stay within their territories year-round and might cover shorter distances for foraging or territorial movements. Estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can Eurasian magpie fly? Is it 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 70 kilometers? The answer is 50 kilometers. Eurasian magpies are mostly resident birds, not known for extensive migratory flights. They tend to stay within their territories year-round and may cover shorter distances for foraging or territorial movements. Therefore, estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can Eurasian jackdaw fly? Is it 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers, 70 kilometers? The answer is 40 kilometers. Eurasian jackdaws are generally non-migratory or perform short-distance movements. They tend to stay within their territories year-round and may cover shorter distances for foraging or local movements. Estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can kestrel fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 100 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Kestrels generally cover distances of around 100 kilometers during their flights. They are not known for extensive migratory flights but may perform local or seasonal movements within their territories. Estimating a specific migratory range might vary based on individual behaviors. Do you know how far can falcon fly? Is it 100 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Falcons, such as the peregrine falcon, are known for their impressive long-distance migrations, covering distances of about 500 kilometers or more during their migratory journeys. However, the specific migratory range can vary between species and individuals within the falcon family. Do you know how far can osprey fly? Is it 2,000 kilometers, 4,000 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers? The answer is 4,000 kilometers. Ospreys are known for their extensive migratory flights, covering distances of about 4,000 kilometers or more between their breeding and wintering areas. They are remarkable long-distance migrants. Do you know how far can red-tailed hawk fly? Is it 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. While red-tailed hawks aren't primarily known for extensive migrations, some individuals may cover distances of about 500 kilometers during seasonal movements or dispersal after the breeding season. However, their migratory behavior can vary significantly between individuals and populations. Do you know how far can bald eagle fly? Is it 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers? The answer is 300 kilometers. While bald eagles are primarily non-migratory or show limited migration, some individuals, especially in northern regions, may travel distances of about 300 kilometers or more during seasonal movements or in search of open water during colder months. However, their migratory behavior can vary significantly between populations. Do you know how far can golden eagle fly? Is it 300 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 700 kilometers? The answer is 500 kilometers. Golden eagles are primarily non-migratory or perform limited migration, but some individuals, particularly in northern areas, may travel distances of about 500 kilometers or more during seasonal movements or when searching for suitable hunting grounds. However, Their migratory behavior can vary significantly between populations. Do you know how far can turkey vulture fly? Is it 1,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. Turkey vultures are known for their long-distance migrations, covering distances of about 3,000 kilometers or more during their seasonal movements, particularly in regions where they migrate to warmer areas during colder months. However, their migratory behavior can vary between populations. Do you know how far can Andean condor fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Andean condors are primarily non-migratory birds, often remaining within their territories in the Andes mountain range. Their flights usually cover relatively short distances and are not known for extensive migratory flights. Therefore, estimating a specific migratory range might not apply to them. Do you know how far can California condor fly? Is it 150 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 500 kilometers? The answer is 300 kilometers. California condors may cover distances of about 300 kilometers or more during their flights in search of food. However, they are primarily resident birds with specific territories and not known for extensive migratory flights. Do you know how far can Himalayan vulture fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers? The answer is 100 kilometers. Himalayan vultures are primarily non-migratory birds, typically staying within their territories in the Himalayas and surrounding areas. Their flights often cover shorter distances, and they are not known for extensive migratory behavior. Hence, estimating specific long-range flight distances might not apply to them. Do you know how far can Manx shearwater fly? Is it 5,000 kilometers, 20,000 kilometers, 100,000 kilometers? The answer is 100,000 kilometers. Manx shearwaters are known for their incredible migrations, covering vast distances of about 10,000 kilometers or more during their annual journeys between breeding and wintering areas. Their extensive flights across the ocean are one of their notable characteristics. Do you know how far can Cape May warbler fly? Is it 1,500 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers? The answer is 3,000 kilometers. Cape May warblers undertake migratory journeys covering distances of about 3,000 kilometers or more between their breeding grounds in North America and their wintering areas in the Caribbean or Central America. Their long migrations distinguish their behavior. Do you know how far can Clark's nutcracker fly? Is it 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers. The answer is 100 kilometers. Clark's nutcrackers are primarily non-migratory birds with relatively small home ranges. They are not known for extensive migratory flights, typically covering shorter distances for foraging or caching seeds. Hence, estimating a specific long-range flight distance might not apply to them.
Bye bye.